In the summer of 1966, a German theologian named Rudolf Bultmann published a statement that would echo through seminary classrooms for the next half-century. He argued that modern people could not be expected to believe in miracles, that the New Testament's accounts of supernatural events were mythological packaging wrapped around moral truths, that what mattered was not whether Jesus actually turned water into wine or walked on water, but what those stories symbolized about the human condition. Bultmann's project was called demythologization, strip away the supernatural, keep the meaning, and an entire generation of pastors trained in that tradition learned to preach the miracles of Jesus as metaphors. The feeding of the 5,000 became a lesson about sharing. The healing of the blind became a symbol for spiritual enlightenment. The raising of Lazarus became a meditation on the human capacity for renewal. There is just one problem with that approach. It requires you to believe that the gospel writers, Matthew, a tax collector trained in meticulous record-keeping, Luke, a physician with a clinical eye for detail, John, an eyewitness who explicitly states he is recording what he personally saw and touched, were either incompetent reporters who confused metaphor with history, or deliberate liars who fabricated events they knew never happened and then allowed themselves to be tortured and executed rather than admit the fabrication. Neither option survives serious examination. The miracles of Jesus are not decorative. They are not illustrations glued onto the margins of his teaching to make the sermons more interesting. They are the teaching. Each miracle is a statement, a physical, visible, undeniable statement about who Jesus is, what he came to do, and what kind of world he is building. And when you arrange them in chronological order and read them as a sequence, a pattern emerges that is so deliberate, so architecturally precise, so clearly designed to make a cumulative argument, that the idea of these events being random acts of compassion by a wandering rabbi becomes impossible to sustain. There is a hidden structure in the miracles, a progression, a curriculum. Jesus was not performing supernatural acts haphazardly. He was building a case, miracle by miracle, category by category, escalation by escalation, until the evidence was so overwhelming that the only possible responses were worship or deliberate rejection. We are going to walk through every recorded miracle in order, and by the time we reach the final one, you will see the pattern. And the pattern will change how you read every page of the Gospels. Every king, upon taking the throne, issues decrees that establish the scope of his authority. He demonstrates jurisdiction. He shows the subjects of his kingdom what domains fall under his command. And the first cluster of miracles Jesus performs after his baptism, and temptation functions as precisely that, a series of jurisdictional declarations, each one staking a claim over a different domain of reality. Miracle 1, water to wine. John 2:1-11. The first miracle, a wedding in Cana of Galilee. The wine runs out, Jesus' mother tells him. He instructs servants to fill 6 stone jars with water, jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. He tells them to draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. The water is now wine, not ordinary wine. The best wine anyone at the feast has ever tasted. The master of the banquet is astonished. Typically, hosts serve the good wine first and bring out the inferior product after the guests' palates have dulled. This host, unknowingly, has saved the finest vintage for last. John calls this the first of his signs, not miracles. Signs. The Greek is semeion, an act that points beyond itself to a deeper reality. Every miracle in John's Gospel is called a sign because every miracle is a signpost. The question is always, what is it pointing at? The water to wine sign points at transformation, specifically the transformation of the Old Covenant into the New. The water was in ceremonial purification jars, vessels of the old religious system. Jesus transforms their contents into wine, the symbol of celebration, abundance, and the messianic banquet that the prophets had promised. The old purification rituals are being replaced by something better, something that tastes like joy. and notice the volume. 6 jars, 20 to 30 gallons each. That is somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of the finest wine ever produced. This is not a modest miracle. This is extravagant, excessive, almost absurd abundance. The kingdom that Jesus is inaugurating is not a kingdom of scarcity. It is a kingdom of overflow. Miracle 2, the official's son. John 4:46-54. Still in Cana, a royal official from Capernaum, roughly 20 miles away, comes to Jesus and begs him to heal his son, who is near death. Jesus says, "Go, your son will live." The man believes the word and leaves. On his way home, servants meet him with news. The boy is alive. He asks when the recovery began, the 7th hour, the exact moment Jesus spoke. This miracle establishes authority over distance. Jesus does not need to be physically present to exert power. His word travels faster and farther than his body. The command issued in Cana takes immediate effect in Capernaum. There is no delay, no degradation, no reduction in power across 20 miles of Galilean terrain. The kingdom is not limited by geography. Miracle 3, the synagogue demoniac. Mark 1:21-28. Capernaum. A Sabbath. Jesus is teaching in the synagogue when a man with an unclean spirit cries out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus silences the spirit with a single command, "Be quiet," and come out of him. The spirit convulses the man, shrieks, and leaves. The crowd is stunned, not primarily by the exorcism. Other exorcists existed in first-century Judaism, using elaborate rituals, incantations, and appeals to higher spiritual authorities. What stunned them was the method. What is this? A new teaching with authority. He even commands the unclean spirits, and they obey him. No rituals, no incantations, no appeal to a higher power, a direct command from his own authority. The demons obey because they recognize the jurisdiction. They know who he is, even when the humans in the room do not. And they obey instantly, involuntarily, the way a soldier obeys a commanding officer whose rank is so far above his own that resistance is not a category that applies. Authority over the spiritual realm. Miracle 4, Peter's mother-in-law. Mark 1:29-31, immediately after the synagogue. Jesus enters Peter's home. Peter's mother-in-law is lying down with a fever. He takes her hand, lifts her up, and the fever leaves. She begins serving them. A small miracle, quiet, domestic, no audience, no crowd, no dramatic confrontation. Just a woman with a fever and a hand that healed her. But the sequence matters. From the synagogue, the public, institutional, religious space, to the home, from the dramatic exorcism to the quiet healing, from the cosmic to the intimate, Jesus is establishing that his authority is not limited to spectacular public displays. It reaches into the ordinary, into the household, into the bedroom where a woman is lying down because her body has failed her and no one in the house can fix it. The kingdom enters kitchens. Miracle 5, the Mass healing at evening. Mark 1:32-34. That same evening after sunset, which means the Sabbath is over and people can now travel, the entire city gathers at Peter's door. They bring everyone who is sick, everyone who is demonized. Mark says the whole city was gathered at the door. Jesus heals many and casts out many demons. The scale expands from one demoniac to many, from one fevered woman to an entire city's worth of suffering. The jurisdiction established in the previous 3 miracles is now applied at volume, and Mark adds a detail that will become increasingly significant as the gospel progresses. He would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. The demons know who Jesus is. He silences them. Not because the information is false, but because the timing is wrong. The revelation of his identity must follow a specific sequence. The demons want to announce it prematurely. Jesus controls the schedule. Miracle 6. The leper. Mark 1:40-45. A leper approaches Jesus and says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." The condition is not if you are able. The leper does not doubt the power. He doubts the willingness. Will the Holy One of God be willing to touch what the law declares untouchable? Jesus is moved. The Greek word is splanchnisomai, a visceral, gut-level compassion, a churning in the intestines that ancient people associated with the deepest possible emotional response. And he does something that no rabbi, no priest, no observant Jew would do. He reaches out and touches the leper. Under Mosaic law, touching a leper made you ceremonially unclean. The contamination transferred from the unclean person to the clean one. But when Jesus touches the leper, the transfer runs in reverse. Instead of the uncleanness contaminating Jesus, the cleanness of Jesus decontaminates the leper. The flow of power reverses the expected direction. Purity overwhelms impurity rather than the other way around. This is a jurisdictional claim over disease, and not just any disease. The disease that the Old Testament treated as the physical embodiment of sin's effect on the human body. Leprosy was not merely a medical condition, it was a theological category, and Jesus overrides it with a touch. Miracle 7, the paralytic lowered through the roof. Mark 2, 1-12. Capernaum, again. A house so packed with people that 4 men carrying a paralyzed friend cannot get through the door. They climb the roof, dig through the thatching, and lower the man on his mat directly in front of Jesus. Jesus looks at the paralytic and says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." The scribes sitting in the room nearly choke. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They are theologically correct. Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus knows what they are thinking. So he poses a question. Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Rise, take up your bed and walk"? The answer is that both are equally impossible for a human being. No mere human can forgive sins. No mere human can heal paralysis with a verbal command. But one of them is verifiable. You can say, "Your sins are forgiven," and no one can prove you wrong because forgiveness is invisible. But if you say, "Get up and walk," and the man doesn't move, everyone in the room knows you are a fraud. Jesus says, "But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And then he turns to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." The man stands. He picks up his mat. He walks out in full view of everyone. The healing is the evidence, but the claim is the forgiveness. The physical miracle is performed to validate the spiritual authority. Jesus heals the body to prove he has jurisdiction over the soul, and with that single demonstration, he has claimed an authority that belongs exclusively to God. The opening phase is complete. 7 miracles, 7 jurisdictional claims, authority over matter, over distance, over demons, over disease, over ritual impurity, over sin itself. The credentials have been presented. The question is no longer, can he do these things? The question is, who is this person who can do all of these things? The first phase established jurisdiction over the human realm, bodies, spirits, sins. The second phase escalates into domains that no prophet, no priest, no king in Israel's history had ever claimed authority over. The created order itself, the stilling of the storm. Mark 4:35-41. Evening on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. A violent squall descends, the kind that the Sea of Galilee is notorious for, where cold air from the Golan Heights crashes into the warm air over the lake and generates sudden, brutal storms. Waves are breaking over the sides. The boat is filling. The disciples, several of whom are professional fishermen who have spent their entire lives on this lake, are terrified. Jesus is asleep on a cushion in the stern. They wake him. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He stands up and speaks to the wind and the sea. "Peace, be still." The wind ceases. The sea becomes perfectly calm, not gradually, instantly. Anyone who has been on open water knows that even after wind stops, waves continue for a considerable time as the energy dissipates. The waves stop simultaneously with the wind. The physics of wave propagation are suspended by a verbal command. The disciples are terrified, and the text is specific that they are more afraid after the miracle than during the storm. Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? In the Old Testament, control over the sea is an attribute exclusively reserved for God. Psalm 89:9. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. Psalm 107:29. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. The disciples, steeped in these scriptures, are watching a man do what only Yahweh does, and they are beginning to understand what that implies. The feeding of the 5,000, all four Gospels, John 6:1-14, the only miracle besides the resurrection recorded in all four Gospels, 5 loaves of barley bread, 2 small fish, a crowd of 5,000 men, plus women and children, likely 15,000 to 20,000 people total. Jesus takes the food, gives thanks, breaks it, and begins distributing. The food multiplies. Everyone eats until they are satisfied. The disciples collect 12 baskets of leftovers, more remaining than what they started with. The multiplication of bread in the wilderness. The echoes are unmistakable. Moses, manna. A people fed supernaturally in a desolate place. The crowd recognizes the pattern immediately. John records their response. This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. They're referencing Deuteronomy 18:15, where Moses promised that God would raise up a prophet like himself. The people see the miracle, connect it to Moses, and conclude that Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy. But Jesus is doing something that Moses never did. Moses prayed and God sent manna from heaven. Moses was the mediator. The source was God. Jesus takes food into his own hands and multiplies it through his own authority. He does not pray for provision to come from somewhere else. He generates it from himself. He is not the mediator between God and the supply. He is the supply. Walking on water. Matthew 14:22-33. Immediately after the feeding, Jesus sends the disciples ahead by boat and goes up the mountain to pray. During the 4th watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m., the disciples see a figure walking across the surface of the lake toward their boat. Job 9:8. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. A direct Old Testament description of God, and now a carpenter from Nazareth is doing it in the darkness before dawn on the Sea of Galilee. Peter asks to join him. Jesus says, "Come." Peter walks on water. Then he looks at the wind. He's afraid. He sinks. Jesus catches him. "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" The miracle is not just that Jesus walks on water. It is that Peter briefly does too. The authority Jesus carries is transferable. The power that defies natural law can be extended to ordinary human beings, temporarily, partially, conditionally. The condition is faith. The limitation is distraction. The lesson is that participation in the supernatural authority of Christ is available to his followers, but it requires a sustained focus that most human beings cannot maintain once they notice the waves. The raising of Lazarus. John 11:1-44. 4 days dead. The body has begun to decompose. Martha, his sister, warns Jesus, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor." The Greek is more direct than most translations suggest. The body stinks. Biological decay is well underway. Whatever residual electrical activity might theoretically have persisted in a freshly dead brain is long gone. Lazarus is not unconscious. He is not in a coma. He is decomposing. Jesus weeps. The shortest verse in the English Bible, Jesus wept, and the most theologically loaded. The Son of God, who knows he is about to reverse the death, who knows Lazarus will be walking out of that tomb within minutes, weeps. Not because he is uncertain about the outcome, because death itself offends him. The presence of death in the world he created, in a species he fashioned in his own image, in a family he personally loves, the wrongness of it produces a visceral emotional response in the God who never intended it to exist. Then he stands at the mouth of the tomb and issues a command that bridges the gap between the natural and the supernatural with 3 words, Lazarus, come out. Augustine observed that if Jesus had not specified the name, every grave on earth would have emptied. The dead man walks out, bound in burial cloths, alive, restored. 4 days of decomposition reversed by a verbal command issued by a man standing in broad daylight in front of a crowd of witnesses. This is the final escalation before the cross. Jesus has demonstrated authority over matter, distance, demons, disease, ceremonial impurity, sin, weather, food supply, the laws of physics, and now death itself. Every category of reality has been placed under his jurisdiction through observable, public, verifiable demonstrations of power. The case is complete. Now step back and look at the full sequence. Because the pattern is not visible in the individual miracles. It is visible only in the arrangement. The miracles escalate in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Dimension 1, scale. The scope expands from individual to collective, 1 demoniac. Then a city full of sick people, 1 leper. Then crowds pressing in from every direction, 5,000 fed. Then 4,000 fed in a second miracle. The power does not diminish with volume, it amplifies. Dimension 2, domain. The authority expands from the human body to the natural world to death itself. Bodies first, fever, leprosy, paralysis, blindness, deafness, withered hands, hemorrhaging, epilepsy. Then nature, storm stilled, water walked upon, food multiplied, a fig tree withered by a word. Then death, Jairus' daughter, recently deceased, the widow of Nain's son, being carried to burial. Lazarus, 4 days decomposed. Each resurrection pushes further into the territory of death, as if Jesus is probing the boundary, testing the defenses, preparing for the final assault. Dimension 3, identity. Each miracle reveals more about who Jesus is, building toward a conclusion that the evidence makes inescapable, but that the human mind resists accepting. The water to wine reveals a creator who can restructure molecular composition with an act of will. The storm stilling reveals the sovereign of Psalm 89 who commands the sea. The feeding reveals the source of provision who exceeds Moses. The water walking reveals the God of Job 9 who treads on waves. The raising of Lazarus reveals the Lord of life and death, who calls the decomposed back to composition by the authority of his voice. Each miracle is a lens, and each successive lens brings the image into sharper focus, until you're staring at a picture so clear that only 2 responses are possible. Either this man is who he is implicitly claiming to be, the incarnate God of Israel, Yahweh in human flesh, the Creator walking inside his own creation, or he is the most dangerous deceiver in the history of the human race. The Pharisees saw the pattern. They understood the trajectory. And in John 11:47-48, immediately after the raising of Lazarus, they convened an emergency council. What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. They did not dispute the miracles. They did not claim the signs were fake or the healings were staged. They acknowledged the reality of what was happening and decided it was politically intolerable. The evidence was too strong. The conclusion it pointed toward was too threatening to the existing power structure, so they decided to kill the evidence. John 11:53. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. The miracles were not incidental to the crucifixion. They were the cause. Jesus was not killed despite his miracles. He was killed because of them, because the pattern they established left no middle ground. No comfortable category of great teacher or moral example or inspired prophet. The miracles forced a binary choice: worship or eliminate, and the religious establishment chose elimination. Every miracle Jesus performed during his ministry was a preview, a demonstration, a trailer for the main event. And the main event was not a miracle performed on someone else's body. It was a miracle performed on his own. The resurrection. Every healing was a temporary fix. Every person Jesus healed eventually got sick again. Every person he raised from the dead eventually died again. Lazarus walked out of that tomb and lived for some number of additional years, and then he died a second time and was buried a second time, and his body decomposed a second time. The miracles of Jesus' ministry were not permanent solutions. They were signs. Signposts pointing toward a permanent solution that had not yet been enacted. A solution that required Jesus himself to enter the domain he had been exercising authority over, the domain of death, and conquer it from the inside. The resurrection is not the 38th miracle in a list of 37. It is the event that all 37 were pointing toward. The water to wine was a preview of the old creation being transformed into the new. The feedings were a preview of the messianic banquet. The healings were a preview of the resurrection body. The storm stilling was a preview of the new creation where chaos has been permanently subdued. The raising of Lazarus was a dress rehearsal for the event that would break the back of death itself. And unlike every previous miracle, the resurrection was permanent. Jesus did not rise and then die again decades later. He rose and is alive now. The body that walked out of Joseph of Arimathea's tomb on the first day of the week is the same body that ascended from the Mount of Olives 40 days later. The same body that Stephen saw standing at the right hand of God as the stones were crushing his skull. The same body that Paul encountered on the Damascus road in a light so brilliant it burned the sight out of his eyes. That body is still alive, still physical, still bearing the marks of the nails and the spear, still recognizable as the carpenter from Nazareth who touched lepers, fed multitudes, stilled storms, and called the dead out of their graves. And that body is the prototype of yours. Paul says it explicitly in 1 Corinthians 15. Christ is the first fruits, the first installment of a harvest that includes every person who has placed their faith in him. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead will raise every believer from the dead. The same transformation that turned a crucified corpse into an imperishable, glorious, powerful, spiritual body will be applied to every body that belongs to him. The miracles are not just historical curiosities. They are previews of your future. Every blind eye that was opened is a preview of the sight you will have in a resurrection body that cannot be dimmed. Every deaf ear that was unstopped is a preview of the hearing you will possess when your body is no longer subject to cellular degradation. Every paralyzed limb that was restored is a preview of the strength you will carry when mortality has been swallowed up by life. The pattern is not just a theological argument, it is a promise, written in miracles instead of propositions, demonstrated in bodies instead of debated in books, physical, tangible, touchable proof that the God who entered his own creation has the power, the authority, and the intention to remake it entirely. 37 miracles plus the resurrection. Arranged in a sequence that moves from the individual to the cosmic, from the physical to the existential, from the temporary to the permanent. A curriculum of power designed to answer a single question that every human being must eventually face. Who is this man? The demons answered it first. The Holy One of God. They recognized him before the disciples did, before the crowds did, before the Pharisees did. The spiritual realm identified him immediately. The human realm took longer. And some of the humans who witnessed the miracles firsthand, who watched the blind see and the dead rise and the storm fall silent at a word, still walked away unconvinced. Not because the evidence was insufficient, because the conclusion was too costly. If Jesus is who the miracles declare him to be, then he has jurisdiction over every atom of your body, every thought in your mind, every decision you have ever made or will ever make. If the miracles are real, you are not autonomous. You are not self-governing. You are living inside a reality that belongs to someone else and that someone has demonstrated, publicly, repeatedly, across every domain of existence, that his authority is absolute. That is why the miracles offend. Not because they are unbelievable, because they are too believable, because if you accept them, you accept everything they imply, and what they imply is total surrender to a king whose power extends over weather systems and molecular structures and the boundary between life and death. The miracles are not asking you to admire Jesus. They are asking you to submit to him. And the difference between admiration and submission is the difference between watching a king ride past in a parade and kneeling when he stops his horse in front of you and tells you to follow. If the pattern revealed something you had never seen before, if the sequence rearranged your understanding of what Jesus was doing and why, drop it in the comments. Tell me which miracle landed differently now that you see it in context. I read every single one. Share this with someone who has been told that the miracles are metaphors. They deserve to see the evidence arranged the way the gospel writers arranged it, as a case so comprehensive that the verdict becomes unavoidable. Subscribe if you haven't. We are reading the text as if the writers meant what they wrote, and I will see you in the next one.